Good evening, folks. I'm Baroque, and welcome back to Mark of the Ninja Remastered. Today we'll be going through Dosans' Tale, which I believe is the content that was added to this edition of the game. Without further ado, let's get stuck in. Now, I don't know how long this is, if it's just a mission or a few missions. It might be more than one stream, but in any case, we'll find out. A tale from the past. In days past, a young Dosan was sent to Tabriz to deal with bandits who have put the clan's future at risk.
It was, 50 years ago that I paid a visit to that fortress outside Tabriz. The only place on Earth where the plants that make our tattoo ink will bloom. We had struck a deal with some bandits. We would watch over their exports to the east, and in return, they would guard our plants. But in time, they learned of the true value of the plants, and like vermin, they turned on us. The clan sent me there to straighten them out.
It's cool to get a look back at another character in the story. Now again, I assume this came out with a remaster. It might have come out sooner, I'm not sure. Secure the clan's supply of tattoo ink. Knock out an enemy after stunning them with dust moss. Arm 2 of the fortress traps without being seen. And use a suspended block trap to terrify a bandit. Now that all sounds like new stuff. Path of Wisdom. You have a non-lethal takedown and can carry more of each of your items. However, you have no sword, cannot use farsight. Focus will not stop time.
I never carried a sword. It was pride, really. Back then, I could bring down anyone with my bare hands.
Just beating on people. I wonder if they're not permanently stunned then. I should have probably gone and checked when this did come out. It's been a day. And that makes it pretty clear the others are probably asleep. They can be revived by their allies, okay. Dusk moths, a cloud of insects that blocks targeted lights and disables struck enemies.
Perfect for creating shadows without arousing suspicion.
I don't necessarily want to waste one there. We'll try it, we'll chuck it at someone and see what happens. Uh-oh.
Are you out there?
No! Okay, now's a good chance to use them. Ah, there it is. That was not my intent. I didn't know it'd immediately come down and make a noise. Oh, that's unpleasant for you. Time. I did not have time. Still got him. It's fine. There's a thing up there. Ridiculous how he's still unconscious. Okay. I don't have all my fancy aerial stuff either. I'm pretty rapid though. Or at least that's all the practice paying off. Oh, that's nice.
Shrouded in lantern smoke and shadow. Stand still too long, and you would feel the scorpions picking.
And that's 2 arrow traps the moment I cross those lines, right? I ain't looking to find out. No. Gotta keep moving quickly. No, death. Okay.
Smug little monkey. You reach for the highest plum, but your grip is weak.
Not more range on that. You kind of dive forward a little bit before you get him. I think the cartwheelie flourish is a little unnecessary, but I like a bit of flash. Seems clear. I get no idea if there's more than one level or not, but fungal spores creates a suffocating cloud. Fallen enemies become infected, and anyone who approaches will cause the spores to rupture again. Ooh.
We discovered the fungus the first time we came to Debris. In the right hands, it's deadly and contagious.
So
The plants
big
grew
groups.
in an ancient conservatory. But to reach them, I had to sneak through the old fortress where the bandits were holed up. It was built centuries ago by some Shah or other. Every hallway was filled with traps, and those bandits didn't know about half of them. But I did. I knew where to find the 3 levers that armed the traps.
Okay.
First would reactivate a bunch of old gunpowder bombs.
This seems pretty unsafe for me. You know, not knowing where any of the goddamn traps are.
The second
Oh.
would fill all the fortress's narrow spaces with spikes.
I'm gonna die on most of these. I can see it now.
Finally, a trigger at the top of the fortress would cause the old fixtures and climbing points to collapse.
But the guards don't need those. I do. Arm 2 of them without being seen. Fantastic. Looks like there's snipers and all kinds of garbage. Contagious fungi, eh? Oh yeah, doesn't stop time now. Very quickly. Oh! He doesn't know. It's fine. Oh man, you don't have to dive. Okay, that's pretty good. Covers up a lot of potential bad. I see cogs in the ceiling. We have no ability to kind of Batman vision our way through to where things are, so it's trial and error. I jump and drop down immediately. which also doesn't look safe. Oh, no. Oh, on that bit they kept going. Thanks, game. Insult to injury. So, do it. I drop again. We go. Well, this way looks even worse. Can I go back up now, or is that door permanently closed? Evening, AJ. We're doing alright. How's about you, bub? Have a good weekend, I hope. Excited for the holiday soon? Oh, yep, that's swingy blades. And the second one is... Oh, I'm glad I waited. Oh, no, they keep going! Hmm. Quick climb seems new. Oh, barely.
Floors gave way below me. Knives flew by my ankles. I can't believe I never once feared I would die.
I like how much he's narrating it. Ooh. Up and around. Yes, please. Hop.
What kind of a madman needs this much security? It's not for me to question a Shah.
Okay, so this is security level number 1. Oh, great! Yep, immediate death. In which case, I trigger them, run back, and wait. I've made a mistake. Just the foot! That does it. Oh. Another set. They're helping me this time. Oh, well done on your victories, bub. Oh, no, keep from the other way! Why on earth did we activate all these traps? Let me out. Yeah, turned off the arrows. Oh, this was the door I was just in, that's fine. Okay, more sleepy guards. We go along to the left first. And hope nobody wakes up their friends. Hello? I think it's time for poison mushrooms. Oh, big leap! Oh, they're kind of immediate. I see, and it spreads. If the other one had seen it. Oh, and it spreads again. How many times? 3. Oh, maybe it just keeps going. Will it hurt me, though? Oh, it spooked him.
Come on.
I may have made this a little messier than it needed to be. I can't reach him now. Aha! Yes, fear. Fear was the enemy, not my incompetence. This dude's on alert. What else have I got? I got those dusk moths again, which can stun. Hopefully won't need those. Oh, hang on, there's a light shining up there as well. Sneaky game, very sneaky. No. Okay. Too much going on down there. Instead, head upwards. We don't necessarily need the mushrooms. Yet. Sounds like a lot of extra work and complications I would not be able to stomach myself.
That fortress had stopped the worst armies the world could throw at it. But I just slipped right through.
I won't go that far, Dosan. There we go. See if we can avoid clearing these out. Oh. Now we need it.
We have you now.
Huh. I wonder why last time it made them terrified of each other. Go the long way around. Oh. Mm-hmm. Dive. I mean, if it aided you in your goals, bub, then fair enough. I'm assuming by EU4 you mean like Europa 4. Oh, there's so many of them, and somehow I've gotten away with it. No, I haven't. They've lost me though, and I've already completed the thing. I do want to get rid of them all though. Hang on, how many can die to these spores? Oh, they're on this side of the door. Okay, the spores were working on that amount. Yeah, that was the one. Steady. Game! Do it. I was there. I had the button and somehow beefed it. I do love that big dive though. And see how it'd be broken if we had the sword. The reason I'm not going in this pot is I'm pretty sure it's an explosive. It happened again! Oh, and the light goes on after a bit, so those moths aren't exactly ideal. Okay, now I know. Didn't realise they had a goddamn time limit, but... back up and up. Much easier to do this from the top rather than the bottom. Oh, it nearly had me again. Oh, he got his mate up. That's what happened. You don't. You don't. Oh, they do. Somehow I got one. Wait, I can float? I can float. I never ended up using that in the main game. How am I doing that without a glider? Ah, squirrel. Flying squirrel. Only because I'm throwing moth at them. Rather than breaking them with darts. In fact, why can't I break them with darts then? I can't break them with darts. What am I doing? Oh, because the darts cause a huge amount of noise. Hence why you might want to use temporary moth instead. I understand. Flying squirrel ninjutsu.
We can see you.
No, you can't.
He's
Did it again! Get it! Don't let him up! Finish him! Where's the mushroom?
I know where you are.
Very powerful tool. Oh, and then a chandelier. Oh, spike traps! In all likelihood, they should have gotten me. Snippers. Double snippers. Covering each other. Have to be quick. Oh, please. I want to take friend. There we go. Okay, which direction is it? Up that way. What's over there? Oh, can't quite get it. But I want to know. Oi. No, can he grab it? Fair enough, game. Did. You'll go look at that light, then you'll turn around, and then ninja squirrel. Worth it. It delayed me by a point of a second, but it was worth it. Oh, it's locked. Right.
Think I heard something.
You didn't. You didn't. You had nothing. Kill him. Oh, I had the slide. It's learning for a moment. So I have some abilities from the main game, but not all of them. Spikes! Goodbye, second sniper. Opens the door.
We are coming for you.
You're not! I only have 2 of those left. Don't even want to use them so soon.
There's nothing here.
You're right. Nothing at all!
He got someone.
I did. Spikes right under my booty. Time to be asleep, friend. There's the last lever.
He'll be back.
Oh, which makes everything rickety and fall over, isn't that nice?
The last trap was armed. It was was time to infiltrate the conservatory.
Okay. It's not nothing. Spikes! You scumbag. Revenge. Quickly. So trap bladed. I kind of don't want to have to deal with everybody. Disgusting. We're away. I deserve this. I deserve this. I just want Squirrel to be cool. So far, it's aided me very little. Wait patiently for the next one. Sorted. That seems to be where these bandit cities are set. Nice to see. You are just blocking the front though, so unless... Oh, wait. Oh, God. How do I do this without time slow? Ha! Want him to move. How to get him to move a step backwards? Maybe by making him scared. There we go.
I know I heard something around here.
We couldn't see it, but yes. Ingenious plan. See it on the floor right in front of it. Pressure pad. Try going around the nasty blade. It worked really well. Oh God. Hey, I can take 2 explosions. Hooray!
You only climb high because your hard monkey skull won't crack in a fall.
Insulting himself by calling himself hard-headed? What's the answer there? In any case, we press on.
There, in the conservatory, the chief had stationed his best, bravest men.
Oh.
I would leave them a gibbering, terrified mess. I had a choice. Terrify the chief's men, but leave them alive to tell the story. No doubt with great exaggeration. Or let the fear spread with blood and precision, leaving just a few terrified survivors.
I think his voiceover adds a great deal to it compared to the main game. Terrify 5 bandits. Ooh. That's a lot of bandits to try and terrify. Oh, and then there's a bonus objective of kill or knock them all out. We'll see what we can do. I'm a lot better at terrifying. can do it with the poison. I don't think I can do it with the moths.
What was that?
No!
Nothing.
Must have been the wind. Mouse. Gotta use your skill set where applicable, I would say. Oh.
The roofs were tiled with old slates all overgrown with brambles. I could drop them on the bandits and leave them stunned. And if any of their friends saw, I knew they would run off in terror.
Oh dear!
Terror was our greatest weapon. Remember, they didn't truly know who we were or what we could do.
Don't let him get away.
One man
I'm already away. Can he take me?
would seem like an army. One or two almost got away. But I always cleaned up my own mess.
I know I heard something around here.
Sorry about that. We're back. He seems plenty scared, but scared enough where he could just turn around and do me. Yoink! How far down does this... Just there. Loud enough noise that it would bring a friend over if I hadn't already bodied most of his friends. Dropping bodies in front of them seems the easiest way to scare them, though. Not even a corpse. Some of these dudes are just unconscious.
A good scare is worth.
And then they immediately shoot each other.
If we frighten them, we could control them.
No sign of him here. I see him.
Oh, he knew! That was cool. Because he was on edge. I need to use one of these suspended block traps. It's just not the easiest things to use. I like that this level is basically just here, have a bit of free reign at the end.
That light, brave heart will leave you. Mock death while you can.
Oh.
What's that noise?
Yes, see your friend stuck in the rafter. Put him.
Hello, little man.
No! It worked!
Time to get out of there before I push my luck.
Somehow. Got away with it.
Cannot hide forever.
To flying squirrel. Time to escape. An absolute meltdown. There's so many little ways to terrify and mess with them as well in the base game with the different tools at your disposal. Game still wants me to knock them all out, but it said terrify and leave some up, to be fair, but now I have to tick off the box. Oh, collectible.
know you're here.
You do not. Where's me stun? This one first. Then you. And throw him off the building. Which terrorized another guy.
Before I pushed my
By mistake. Oh, if he sees me do the dive. Okay, okay, it was like last time. I get it now. One more. I should probably deal with that one who's shooting in despair. With poison.
That was the last of them. Time to go back. Down the torturous secret roads that led home.
It somehow worked out. I'm not going to pretend it was all planned, but there was a bit of a plan.
I had delivered a message to the chief and, well, we never had trouble with him again. I returned to the clan satisfied. Years passed, and I became curious about the ink that I had saved. I studied it and mastered its use. Nobody knows more of its secrets than I do. And nobody here values it more. The fate of the clan rests in those drops. I will do whatever it takes to ensure our future.
I still didn't shed any light on if it actually makes a person insane or not, though. Whatever. That was a pretty fun level. I get shot. Yes, exactly. Well, the seals for it, though. So was he just that one level then? It was. That's a shame. Well, it's going to be a shorter stream than I thought. I think the other thing as well that I wanted to do was... Where was it? It's in here somewhere. It's not in achievements. Go away. Steam up. Where was it? Where was it? Wasn't it about us? It's in here somewhere. There was a way for me to access the developer commentary. Oh, but like, there's a way to read them. That won't be in credits. Nope. That. We saw this last time, that I was able to actually see the credits, so I'm not sure why I now can't. And let me see if I have to be in the level or something. There we go. Okay, for those of you who've watched up to this point and have got that last bit level, but don't want to sit with me as we read through some of the developers' little insights going through the game. Now, you can find these on the individual levels as you go, but I do want to have a good read through them because I love getting these bits of insight from the devs. So again, if this is where you folks want to sign off, you're more than welcome to. Cheers, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And for the rest of you who want to stick through and maybe just have me steady tones reading through, you're welcome to join me. Let me just have a swig of my beverage. Oh. It's certainly one I'll bear in mind, AJ. Again, I can't promise when I'll get to it, but it is now in the backlog. Okay, this was the bit we read yesterday, so now let's go through. Art commentary. I was having difficulty nailing down the ninja's design. We needed something iconic but not traditionally heroic, as his character can take on a variety of moral angles. In the bar one night, I was relating my frustrations to a good friend over a couple pints, and he suggested that I look into traditional Japanese tattooing. I remember that as a turning point, because I was able to nail the design quickly afterwards, and many of our game design and story concepts fell out of it as well. Errand but filler. About filler? One of those. But yeah, the tattoo is like a huge element of the game. So even the idea of a ninja at the start being like that initial point, developing into that tattoo, just from a suggestion from a friend. See, this is the kind of stuff I love. Programming commentary on the bit I was terrible at come university. The bell is one of the first things you hear or see in the game, and it poses some unique challenges due to its location. This was one of only a couple locations where we wanted you to be able to see and hear through a wall, but not allow the player or NPCs to move through it. At first we tried a variety of ways of faking this, like having multiple sound emitters that we turned on and off, but eventually we added a proper way of marking pieces of the world as transparent or transparent sounds, mainly to make this bell work the way we wanted. Rook Miles. These little intricacies of just finicky ideas trying to get like the plan to work. Like, you can have the most amazing ideas in the world for a video game. If you can't program it to work properly and function as intended, nothing will happen, of course. The map is auto-generated from the level itself in order to eliminate the need for an artist or designer to hand draw it, but it also looked like solid coloured blocks and lines through most of development, which nobody was happy with. I was playing Diablo 3 at the time, and looking at their map, which has a bit of a hand sketch look, inspired me to work with Jeff and get our map looking like an ink and canvas painting. Yeah, I'd say that worked pretty well. Design commentary. We were planning to include collectible audio logs in each level, but we wanted to make them short. The game moves quickly, and a 30 to 60 second or more stretch of backstory would have felt too long. We came up with the idea of writing audio logs as haiku. I thought so! Which would be short and also a little enigmatic, giving the player a reason to reread them later on. I think that worked pretty well. Sometimes it was a little difficult to grasp what they were trying to sell in the moment of a haiku, but I can understand why they went for that approach, and I think it worked for most cases. I remember a very specific point in playing the game where I was extremely frustrated how I couldn't understand when the guards could see or hear me. This was forcing me to play on a surface level of understanding where I could only guess at the consequences of my actions, and was unable to plan anything complex. In my mind's eye, I recall a metaphorical switch in my head. It made me go on a crusade to clearly delineate everything, from sound to vision codes to what current guard state is. Now, on the harder difficulty on New Game Plus, they do turn off, like, those little sound cues and the, like, vision cones to take it back to that level of difficulty. I think it's very interesting they got to that point as, like, a baseline normal mode level. It was too much. Art commentary. The tiling system we used for the level art allowed us to reuse all the individual pieces we painted over and over again. Each chair or dish or plant is a single piece placed in the background. Reimagining the wall decor of rooms dozens of times using only the same art pieces definitely tested my creativity. Really great. That's a fair point, AJ. And get a lot from haikus like that. And I love this in games, especially like because you see a lot more procedural generation these days and the reuse of assets. It's creating those building blocks and using them in interesting ways again to make things feel unique. You do save time on creating like bespoke assets on each one, but it's a skill all of its own to build it for each individual space. And I think they did a fine job for how quickly you're going through it. We went through a lot of voices before we found the right one for Aura. The rest we hit on right away, which included my Canadian sounding guard. I love it when other devs, by the way, end up doing some of the voice acting, either to save time and money. It was like the lady Rebecca Ford, who is now like the CEO of Warframe, was at first the community manager, then ended up just doing some lines for like your helper, let's say. And then that role became hugely important in the game, and she, both as a community manager, a voice actress, and now a CEO, just has a lot of community love for it, so I always love to hear stuff like that. We knew how important she was to the story, and how her voice needed to be perfect. From all the audition tapes, Lisa, and Bailey stood out to everyone, and once we had her in the studio, we knew that was Aura. Oh. Art commentary. The tutorial takes place in the Hidden Ninja Clan headquarters, but is surrounded by a busy city. I spent about a year and a half living in Tokyo. My experience with the city definitely affected the way I thought about the Ninja Clan's base. Obviously, Tokyo is really busy, but I found that it was easy to find quiet spaces in the middle of everything if you just knew where to go. There's so much going on there that it's easy to hide stuff in the middle of everything. Big and sure. Yeah, I liked that about, especially that first level, that jumping between like the Japanese architecture and then suddenly the police officers, essentially. I liked it a lot. I think this game has very striking visuals and they've worked with it throughout. Programming. For almost half of the development of Mark of the Ninja, there are actually 3 movement types: sneaking, walking, and running. Sneaking felt, well, sneakier, but it was either confusing or was never used by our playtesters. There just wasn't enough difference between sneaking and walking, so we simplified to 2 distinct movements: walking and running. We still have an unused button on the controller from where sneak used to be. I'm Johnson. I love stuff like that as well. Simplifying it just tends to work better, and I feel like, at least from my playthrough, I'd have been running around, and if walking had been like a middle point of alerting attention and that kind of thing more, I would have absolutely been going even worse. I think having the base walking speed kept it flowing. Like, if you'd have had to slow it down even more, it would have been too much. More art. I don't remember the exact day, but at one point, feeling fairly frustrated, we decided to take this visual representation of sound and sight very literally. I generated a number ring FX to do just that. At the time I put them together, and they were very much placeholder. I thought for sure they would revisit them stylistically, but in the end, they shipped and seemed to do the job just fine. I assume that is literally the blue rings that come out for the sounds. Again, that simplicity just works really well. You don't need to overcomplicate it. Evidently, AJ. Because our world is 2D, some lighting concepts are hard to translate. Light shouldn't go through walls, but what about through stairs or catwalks? Should a flashlight always cast light through stairs, or only when a guard is looking behind them? We don't really want a swinging flashlight to suddenly reveal the player unexpectedly from the other side of the room, as that will feel unfair. At the same time, guards should be able to intentionally shine their flashlights behind stairs or through catwalks, otherwise they appear unrealistic or just inept. We went back and forth on these issues a lot, and tried a variety of combinations before settling on the final behaviour in the game, where guards need to actively look behind those platforms for their lights to shine through. Look, Miles. I think that worked quite well. There was a few moments where it got a little confusing early on, but we got a good feel for it by the end. Breaching the perimeter. Again, these would be going on specific levels, some of these audio points. Exactly. And I think for Path of Exile specifically, the fact they are still looking after that first game means you can have the best of both worlds, you know? This area is a great part of this level, sneaking or dicing your way through each floor with the threat of getting caught escalating as it gets closer to the lights coming on. Oh yeah, I remember this level, because every time you go into a room the guards are like, oh, we're turning the lights on floor 15. When this first went in it was fun, but we didn't have the feeling of tension we wanted with the time limited lights coming on. At the time, we had the regular game music playing. It was just pulling it flat. So over a weekend, I took the music pieces we had composed and reworked them with some additions into a building track that lasted the length of time the player has before the lights turn on. Built it in a way that transitions into regular combat music. That kicks off when the player's detected. This really drove home the feeling that something bad was going to happen if you didn't keep moving. Matthew Martensian. I think that works really well, by the way. Music is always the unsung hero of games. So more often than not. When it came to challenge rooms, I wanted different music to really help set them apart from the main levels. Also, I wanted to try something new, so I decided to make a procedurally generated track. Oh. I knew I wanted, because yeah, I was going to say it's pretty ambient. I knew I wanted an ambient style track, just to fill the space and set the mood. Something that doesn't call lots of attention to itself. I started by collecting sounds that gave the feeling I was looking for and laid them out in my DAW to get the right levels for everything. Once everything sounded good, I bounced them all out into separate pieces. These pieces were then put into Fmod where I layered them back together at the levels I had arrived at in my DAW. The difference being, now I triggered all the layers, each layer containing similar sounds, randomly. This created an ever-evolving soundscape that's never quite the same. It worked so well that we used it for the main menu music as well. Oh, and that's the music we'll be hearing right now, I assume. Very nice. At the beginning of production, it felt like every new gameplay feature we added took away part of my toolset for making things look pretty. Everything had to be binary light or dark, so I couldn't add dramatic lighting. The tiling system meant that I had to paint everything on a grid, so I couldn't use too many fun shapes. The fog of war blurred and desaturated a large portion of the screen, meaning I had to rethink how to distribute colour. Games, especially 2D games, always come with art restrictions, but Mark of the Ninja had a lot more than I ever experienced. It was incredibly frustrating at the beginning because it felt like every time I figured something out, we would add a new feature and I would have to do it again. However, the problem solving was actually pretty rewarding, and it forced me to deal with functionality in a way I hadn't before. It's a pretty great example of how working with a really tight set of restrictions can help you grow. My life is hard. No, it's not. I can show. I think that's a really interesting look behind the curtain. Like little things like that. Every bit of artistic detail having to work within how the game itself is built and limiting like your palette and having to work within that and progressing as you go. Really cool stuff. During one particular playtest of this encounter, I realised we might actually have a shot at accomplishing the goals we wanted with Ninja. Playtester Alex had never played Ninja before, but he resolved this encounter in a way I'd never anticipated, but was totally consistent with the systems we'd developed. Specifically, he took out one of the guards and used his body to disable the lasers, and escaped without ever killing the power. Totally valid, but I'd never thought of that as an option. My mouth literally hung agape, and I realised we might have just reached the density of systems where players would be able to resolve situations in valid ways the designers hadn't specifically planned. Given a major goal was providing that level of player-directed choice, it was a very edifying moment. Nils Anderson. Players will always do crazy stuff that you've never thought of. Like, whether that's D&D, making video games, like how folks react in a play space. Even just playing together with friends, people will do some wild shit. Early in development, this area introduced a new opponent type, which we would call civilians. They wouldn't be dangerous or aggressive in any way. If they saw the ninja, they'd shout and make noise, potentially drawing genuinely dangerous guards. In this area specifically, they were repairmen, fixing the power outages the player caused. The design notion seems sound, a non-aggressive enemy that draws another, more dangerous enemies. We even added a score penalty should the player kill them. They were implemented and mostly functional, but they just never ended up being very interesting. They were basically boring cars that didn't really change the way the player behaved. We removed them, although we were able to reskin them and reuse some of their animations as the player's ally ninjas in the first and final levels. That's a nice way to make sure your assets don't go to waste. Challenger went through a couple of different presentations. Initially, they were just that, a secret room. It's part of the world. That felt a little artificial and gamey, even for an abstract 2D game with points and a high score. As we developed more of the game's themes and what the implications of the ninja's tattoos were, it felt right to present them as a mental challenge or hallucination within the ninja's mind. I'd agree with that. I feel like them taking you at a separate space rather than forcing you into just a block sat within the world just makes more sense as a player. Originally we wanted the ninja to have a grappling hook they could swing back and forth on, but ended up feeling too complex and resulted in a lot of ninja planting his face into walls. Aww. We simplified it into the grapple to point mechanic, and added the dangling back in as a simple up and down motion. Once our artist has some gruesome stealth kills to the dangling, we knew that was what we were looking for. From Johnson. I was going to say, I really enjoyed the use of the grapple hook in this game for what it is, without it being overly complicated. And again, because we would have absolutely just been face planting the whole time. And those dangle stealth kills are a delight. The outdoor sections before the generator was one of the sandboxes I used for testing. A large open section with lots of guards close together, multiple grapple points and hiding spots. It was a good spot for examining how the AI responded to different situations, and how ninja tools could be implemented. Very fun place to play. Wade Lindley. That's something that comes through with development. You've created a space and you're like, oh, we can use this bit for testing, rather than having to build something out separate. Like, this spot works for trying new ideas. Very cool. Clay's office is located across the street from United Games Front, who were developing the game Sleeping Dogs. Oh, yeah, Sleeping Dogs was pretty good. I don't usually like GTA stuff, but Sleeping Dogs I really enjoyed. Around the same time that we were working on Mark and Ninja. While discussing this at lunch one day, it occurred to us that although we had recently added guard dogs to Mark of the Ninja, we hadn't put any in Sleeping Dogs. So we did. Aww. We started with that cross-pollination, by the way, within the games industry, and like, if you work in a similar space to other developers, like, you know, you might go to the same places for lunch, go out to the same places to drink, go to the same gyms. Like, that cross-pollination of ideas is so important for the industry, and a lot of the time, like, you see it with stuff like Overwatch and Marvel Rivals right now, right? Like, a lot of people go, Overwatch is dead, or game, Rivals is king, and it's like, you want both games to succeed, because then both have to get better. They have to push each other through competition. Like, you see a bigger example with, like, when WoW in recent years, just on us, from the tail end of Legion going down for a few expansions into Shadowlands, people started going to play more of MMOs more often because it was failing. And you saw this massive uptick in player counts over that way. And WoW really had to shift its focus in a way that's now made the game a huge amount better. Competition and having games, especially games in the same genre, succeed is paramount to things getting better. Don't just shit on stuff. Picking sides. It's silly. We started with our level creation tools from previous games, so we had a lot of tech immediately available to use. I wonder how much this Mac and Ninja stuff has moved on to Rotwood. Like, that's the latest game of theirs that I played a bit of in early access and really enjoyed. In addition, among other tool features, we created a special smart tiling system to allow large swaths of reusable level art to be placed quickly. In all, this allowed level designers to get a reasonable feel for levels far faster than in our previous games. However, this had a toll on our tool code. In-house code for the level tool alone numbers roughly made up 100,000 lines. An additional 12,000 lines made up our FX tool, another 9,000 our UI tool, another 5,000 our animation markup tool, and of course there were other tools as well. Programming and things, it terrifies me. It's so much. The load and what that brings to bear on a game. Now, if one thing goes wrong, that's why you hear people talk about whether it's WoW or League, or especially older, bigger games, spaghetti code and things that kind of made over 10 years ago somehow affecting things today in ways you cannot comprehend. It's terrifying. The last 9 haiku in this world linked together to tell the story of a heroic mission undertaken by the Hisomu clan. The events in these haiku all relate to real, or at least historical accounts, from poisoning a target by dripping poison down a thread, escaping over a moat by running across a bamboo stalk. I love that. A bit of historical pulling. The nightingales are a reference to the nightingale floors that were used in Japanese castles as an alarm. Anyone, even a ninja, who walked on them would make a loud, squeaking noise that would alert the guards, and the daimyo, who gets out of bed to find relief, is a really oblique reference to Usagi Kenshin, who, as legend has it, was murdered by a ninja who hid in his latrine and murdered him with a spear when he sat down to use it. Oh, terrifying! You never go to the toilet the same way again. You think a ninja's just waiting in your toilet with a spear. How do you not see a ninja with a spear in your toilet? Unless they'll... Nope, if we're thinking like ye olden days, potholes, wooden bit with hole in the floor. Oof. Patient and smelling ninja. Putting together level art, I often found myself working with designers to go over the functionality of a space, and how best to communicate it visually. Spent a lot of time making sure all climbable surfaces were instantly recognizable to the player, like highlights, and that interactive objects, like doors and hiding spots, caught the player's eye, still blending in with the environment. Kelly Graham. I'm trying not to repeat names that I've already read, but sometimes I forget. A swig of his beverage, make sure you do the same. Music for the game works on a 4-layered interactive system. Other than the challenge rooms, which had its own procedural generative system, each world has its own ambient bed track, and 3 layers above it that react to the various levels of attention the player may have attracted. In this way, the music is very informative of what's going on. The reactive levels work in a way that drowns out the ambient bed and modulates based on whether the player is being spotted, chased, or hidden, but still hunted. On certain levels, we would force the music to bump up a level and stay there when we wanted to keep the sense of urgency going. Certainly could feel that. It would jump into that music very organically, and I like that a lot. Until very recently, there has not been much of a pre-production phase to our games due to the time and budget restraints of being an indie developer. This means that when I was painting concepts, I always had to make sure that all the stuff in the concept could actually be assets that I used in the game. I started painting assets for World 1, as you see, before we finalised what the game was about. For that reason, it was the most generic city of all the locations. Design is a lot more interesting when you know some specifics of what you are designing. But that was not a luxury I had when we started. Mark of the Ninja. The assets for World 1 were done to make sure the right art pipeline was in place. For this reason, they've been through many colour and tone changes. I did end up painting very rough concepts for all the worlds to make sure that things would read as light and dark. After those concepts were done, pardon me, I chopped them up into individual assets, fine-tuned them into production art. And another thing about like games pipeline and understanding like concepting and pre-production and setting up, like, you'll find a lot of stories about games that have gone wrong. Like take Anthem as an example, or something like Destiny, where the pipelines between different parts of the dev team and different areas of expertise, you know, your art, your music, your programming, etc., were not linked in a way that meant stuff could flow and be produced quickly. Like Destiny was especially used to be real, like the pipeline they had to kind of get things lined up and released used to be a nightmare. I've heard over the years it's gotten a bit better, but not too much more. But having a smooth pipeline from the start is so important that it is worth the hit to not having those initial designs. Again, as they said here, like the restraints of the budget and time for being an indie studio. It'd be nice to say all games get delayed until, you know, they're perfect and ready, but it's not realistic when they need to put bread on the table, you know? The design purpose behind the dogs, oh, blessed doggos that you could leap down and chop, was to have an enemy that could sense the player even if they were in the darkness. They couldn't immediately detect the player though, as this would feel grossly unfair. So we did the 360 smell radius that will lead dogs closer to the player. And the dog will detect the player when they get close enough. And funnily enough, this worked extremely well. Even though dogs aren't actually that dangerous, playtesters were always on edge when they saw any dogs appear. I would agree 100%. I was. Trial of Shadow. This ended up being one of the longest levels in the game. It has the largest number of guards. At one point it was longer and even more broken up. After listening to this bit, the screen just faded to black and the player appeared later on. This was literally the only place in the entire game where we did this. So we removed this strange teleport. That meant we had to stitch together the space between those two areas though, and at least put a small something there. Realising something down the line, having to go back again. We didn't want to do a lot of one-off missions, type scripted sequences, partially just because we wouldn't have time to do them right. Mostly because it didn't jive with our notions of player-directed gameplay. One of the few exceptions is this challenge, where the player couldn't be seen, which we thought would be interesting. It would challenge the player to stay unseen instead of just fighting or fleeing if detected. Ideally, players would learn some ways to stay concealed that they could apply later, even when they weren't being forced to stay undetected. Usually the stealth game bits where you insta-fail if your scene don't work, but I think we pulled this off. However, it was probably one of the most challenging things to implement just due to all the special cases and conditions that had to be handled. Jason, the designer responsible for this level, probably spent more time on this one sequence than I did on some entire other levels. That he managed to get this to work, let alone be as great as it ended up being, is a testament to his talent and dedication. Seriously, there were so many bugs. Oh, bless. specific finicky levels as well. Especially one that gives you information you can use later after being forced to use it. I think we certainly saw that in our little playthrough here. The final sequence after you steal the tracking device was basically taken wholesale from a vertical slice demo we created 6 months or so into development. That versus just 6 disconnected, contextless encounters, but we were able to reproduce at least 3 of those encounters, including this one. I actually don't remember where the other bits ended up though. Oh, so much can get left on the cutting room floor. I think one of the reasons we don't see as many demos these days, or even vertical slices, though that's more being sent to publishers and stuff like that, trying to sell people on your game. It feels like we don't get as much of that out in the press, at the very least, as we used to. You get little bits, like you'll see YouTube and like, and we were invited early to play this bit of the game. A lot of the time, I feel like in the past 5 or 6 years, maybe longer, those bits that people have played still end up just being main parts of the game because it's just so time consuming and expensive now. Can't afford to cut a load out again. It's same with demos. Original art for the ninja was going to be traditionally animated frame by frame. It looked amazing, but led to complications during development with memory budget and trying to cleanly attach effects like the grappling hook to specific parts of the ninja character. We ended up animating the ninja using a piecewise build after all, which eventually allowed us to create several radically different costumes with special abilities for the player to pick and choose between. Tam Johnson. Again, another kind of limitation and understanding. We could do this really beautifully looking, time-consuming way to go, but actually doing something a little easier gives us freedom in other ways. I think understanding that from this dev team and not just kind of digging in their heels or going from it, like, you need to be able to pivot, you need to be able to be flexible and understand what that opens up for you in the future. One of the first major features I worked on for Ninja was controlling how the sound effects play depending on how far away they are from the player. I decided that the base volume of a sound would be determined by a simple straight line distance to the sound, which is easy enough to calculate. However, we also wanted sounds that are farther away or coming from the other side of a wall or door to sound muffled and far away. To achieve this, we do a pathfinding operation through the empty spaces of the level to find the approximate distance the sound would have to travel to reach the player. We apply an audio filter based on the result. This is much more an expensive operation and a lot of time was spent optimizing it. The system is also used in reverse by calculating the distance from the player who is running, for example. We can determine which of the guards should hear the player's footsteps. And some of that just seems so very simple. It's like the distance of sound can end up being a nightmare. Goddamn programming. I'm terrible at coming up with names, and whenever I'm struggling, I look at my record collection. Karajan is named after Herbert von Karajan, a great conductor with a great last name. We also name-checked several Japanese improvising musicians in the game, including Toshimaru Nagatomaru, apologies for butchering these, Otomo Yoshihide, and loosely, Tetsuzi Atamaya. Chris Dalen. It's where you draw your inspiration. Sometimes it goes the other way. When I would world build for D&D sessions, occasionally I would just like string letters together that rolled well off the tongue and write down a name. I think I had a city called Ozma at one point. And then like years later, I just was going back to that place to do a bit more world building there, thinking, oh, my players might end up going there. And apparently, it's a city in a Final Fantasy game. Pure coincidence. Drove me mad. We knew we didn't want music wall to wall for the entire game. On the audio level, this is the sort of game that needs space and room to breathe. When there was music, we wanted it to mean something, so we built an interactive system that would react when player had been spotted, was fighting or fleeing, was being hunted. As a base to this, we'd have ambient music tracks that almost blend into the background. Each world got its own track to glue it together thematically. As the art style of each world changed, so did the music. And I really like this approach a lot, by the way. It adds a bit of familiarity to what you're doing, like you know when a certain style of music hits, oh, I've been spotted, combat is happening, that's where we are in the game. You know what I mean? Even if I was unclear whether a character proper spotted me or not if I had another moment to hit a button and take them out before an alarm would go. I had a moment where the music would fade back down. And I think having something a little more ambient helps kick it up a notch when things indeed go up a notch. Designing environments that look dark but also interesting and functional was a huge challenge. There were several iterations tested before the final solution. I eventually realised that the characters and the platforms had to be silhouettes for people to understand where they were in the dark. I had to work within a small tonal range for the foreground art so it would feel like night, but light enough for the characters to pop out. This was especially true for any of the interior environments. I kept eliminating detail from the art assets to reinforce the darkness. Adding lots of windows and glowing technology to the interiors helped make the closed-in spaces visually interesting. The time when I was figuring everything out was frustrating for everyone because understanding if you were in light or dark is an essential feature of the game's design. A difficult problem to solve, but again, they've still managed to have the art style be extremely striking and readable. Like 9 times out of 10, apart from some of the traps, which I suppose are more meant to be obscured on occasion, it was very readable. I think they did a fantastic job. Toyama Castle was an actual military stronghold in the medieval Japan province of Omi. During Japan's Civil War period, Sengoku Jidai, it's a very popular one, when ninja actually operated. Supposedly, I will say, I'd need to do some history there. Who said they never existed, or they seem to have drawn a lot of what was there historically for this game, though. Again, you've got to do your research if your game's about ninjas. It is a topic that I do need to go and have a proper read at sometime. The castle was held by the Azai clan. In 1558, the castle was besieged and an eager ninja named Takuma Doshan and his men infiltrated Sayama Castle. They fabricated paper lanterns that had the same symbols the castle's guards used. Equipped the lanterns and dressed as samurai, they walked into the castle and promptly set it on fire. My goodness. Chaos caused by the fire allowed the attacking army to take the castle. This level was actually inspired after I read about this incident, so it seemed like that just had to be reflected in the game somehow. It was pretty good going and setting fire to that place and pulling them all back in. I'll say though, any historical things from that always question whether or not they were actually ninja or they were just, samurai or others doing shady stuff. Whether ninja was actually a thing, but I love learning bits of history like this. This level is the first in the game that presents something approaching non-linearity. Early on in prototyping, we experimented with levels that were even more non-linear. Similar to Thief, one of my biggest inspirations. Oh god, I remember the first Thief. I was terrible at it, as you can imagine if you've been watching this playthrough. But no matter what we tried, those levels were just awful. Which doesn't make the 3D to 2D conversion well. It's too difficult to mentally map the space and players become lost too easily. Fair. I feel like they nailed it just right in this game. Some of them were pretty big and I was getting a little turned around, but I feel like they kept it reined in. So we were provided something non-linear but a bit more structured that still allowed the player to choose a subset of all the possible rooms. This seemed to split the difference well. Provided the player the ability to choose which vents they want to go after without creating a space that makes it easier for players to get lost. Initially, we didn't have any lasers in the elevator shaft at all, but that did make wayfinding quite a bit more difficult. By offering branches that still went one floor at a time, we got what we wanted. Understanding how to limit your design without overdoing it. That restraint can be very difficult to do. We see games and devs overdo it too often to their detriment, so I gotta commend it here. We choose to have an optional objective for opening all the vents, but it was a very deliberate decision to make it an opt-in decision on the player's part. I can't imagine that, a level that open all the vents. Oh. So I felt like something the player can choose to pursue versus a sub-objective the player can fail without preventing them from completing the level. Players shouldn't feel punished for not doing something that's optional. But it's not really optional, is it? Exactly. That's a lesson that, say, the WoW devs had to do. You create a load of optional content that awards a little bit of the main currency for something or borrowed power. People will feel it is not optional and will force themselves to do it even if they hate it. think it's a lesson a lot of devs still could do with learning, especially with so many battle passes and daily quests and grinds. Doesn't feel optional if I need it for the thing I want every day. Ooh, this one I'm very curious about. Final ending sequence. Despite the fact that it is both short and relatively simple to get through, went through many revisions. My initial idea for this was to be a longer sequence that was about 60 seconds long. The player had to get past some guards as the clock was counting down. Pacing here felt strange though, so we removed the enemies and turned it into this hanging panel explosive sequence. In the end, it seems that all of our games have a sequence that's very short to play, but takes a tremendous amount of time to implement. In Shank 2, I did play through Shank 1 and 2, but again, this was older than this ago. There was a rolling boulder in the jungle level that took a long, long time to put together. Rooftop fire was Mark of the Ninja's rolling boulder. Partly due to small team size, and also just due to company culture, there were a lot of opportunities to work in a variety of areas of the game, and to use your own judgment when deciding how things should work. For me, one of the little details that I'm personally proud of was tweaking and fine-tuning the behaviour of the guards when they were searching for a sound or something suspicious that they saw, and working with the artists to get supporting animation for their search patterns. And I think those little details in the animations are one of the most impressive parts of this game. Like the whole stuff with the guard terrorizing animation sets is just really nice. The Kelly boss was probably the least enjoyable scenario to build. We didn't really want the boss to break the rules we carefully set out for the player, but everything we tried exploded in combinatoric possibility. Combinatoric possibility. That's a new word. I assume just resulting in combat is what that means. That we couldn't account for. In the end, we opted to take the ninja's path, make the gameplay about avoiding him completely. I couldn't remember when we first saw him. I was like, right, this is going to be a boss, but surely we're not going to go up and stab him. But no, we end up dropping a giant light on him. I understand why they said that was one of the weaker elements. Oh, a bit of Foley. I love Foley. I love seeing videos of people doing Foley work. It is fantastic. Bits of leather and slapping fruit and all kinds of stuff. Foley's a wonderful part of design. Creating Foley is always a fun undertaking. The biggest thing I needed this time around was clanky, jiggly guards tromping around. While I've got a great library of footsteps to draw on, and a selection of boots to record if I need more surfaces, I didn't have the jangle I was looking for. So I broke out what everyone calls the dead body bag. Oh no. This is a really big black canvas duffel bag that I filled with packing blankets to give it some weight. I then strapped my large travel backpack to it, which has a lot of buckles and zippers. And to get some metal sound, I hung some studded belts off it. With this contraption, I was able to get what I needed to build the sound of our well-equipped guards stomping around. See, that's just awesome. Foley's so cool. Dragging guards around was another fun Foley exercise. I needed to make sounds for guards being dragged around on different surfaces. I turned to the dead body bag again. I used for the walking Foley sounds. But for this recording in the studio, I wasn't going to cut it. Even if I had a Foley floor, it wouldn't have been big enough to get a long enough drag to make a loop out of. So I found myself dragging a large black duffel bag, covered on bags and belts, around my apartment building and back alley. I'm not sure anyone saw me, but if they did, I bet they were very confused. The other aspect of it is like seeing people do it. Oh, delightful. Just have another swig of my beverage. It's a lot of talky talks. My throat is already starting to be like, hot please. Usually in any game or movie, every character has a certain amount of Foley noises for the sound of their movements. In Mark of the Ninja, I decided to treat our ninja a little differently. I wanted to emphasise just how sneaky he was, so I created no movement Foley for him. He still makes footsteps, so you can tell where you are, but they are quieter than any other character's steps in the game. Our ninja is so good, even his clothes don't make a sound. I love that little detail. It's only something now you can look at in hindsight that I didn't notice. Awesome. To create environments, we used the same level builder as Shank and Shank 2, but with some major changes to our process. I was the only artist on Mark and Ninja's environments for the first 8 months of production, blimey. Which meant that hand painting everything like we had done in Shank 2 was out of the question. We created a tiling system for the platforms so the level designers could easily lay down collision geometry and change it as needed. As an artist, working with a tiling system kinda sucks because it means you need to work on a grid, and match up all the edges, boring. The tiling system was also used for all the interior backgrounds. It greatly affected the look of the game. I decided that if flatness and tiling were necessary to the production process, I should do my best to play them up artistically. As much as I despise painting tiles, it was interesting to come up with ways to make it look good. There's little challenges. The sequence where the player follows Karajan is total smoke and mirrors. After the camera push is released, Karajan walks through a trigger and is magically teleported to another part of the level. So it's trying to assassinate the fella. This repeats each time you see him. There are actually a number of bugs where you could catch up with Karajan. Because you don't fight him, he didn't even have hit response animations or anything else that would actually let the player interact with him. After I put in countless safety measures, I am nearly positive the player can't ever actually catch up with Karajan. I wonder if that held true through to release and if they needed any patches to stop that down the line. One consequence of splitting the two levels apart, the endings are quite a bit smaller. This final wing was added by Jamie's, Kel's founder and Ninja's executive producer and project lead, General Atismo, who wanted to make the building up to Kelly a bit more substantive. I really liked how it ended up. It worked out well. You just kind of ended up in the room with him. I felt that bit was a little bit, you walk up and you stab him, which I think it worked out thematically, but the getting to him was a lot and I liked it. As you may have guessed, this level and the previous one beginning in the exact same place wasn't a coincidence. After this level was first grey blocked, this level and the previous one were actually one gigantic level. But after we started to put encounters in the level, we realised that playing the entire thing end to end would be about 2.5 hours on the first time, and this was just absurd. We split the level straight down the middle, which actually divided pretty cleanly. Additionally, by having two separate levels, we didn't have to deal with turning the original building into a giant flaming ruin or anything like that. And with less things in it, the level loads faster too. Silver linings. These rocket turrets are only used in this level. I think there's only 2 or 3. They're vestiges of an earlier design for the Kelly boss fight. The idea was to have you reflect the rockets with darts into the floor, which Kelly would fall through. It was way too complicated to build. You can still technically reflect those rockets with a dart. It's actually not too hard if you aim while stopping time. Wild. I would never have thought to have even tried to reflect rockets with a dart. That seems a little, it's a bit of a reach, just naturally to come to that conclusion. For us, it was important to be able to make it through the entire game without killing anyone. However, we had to make exceptions for both Kelly and Karajan. Karajan we felt was important for the sake of the game's themes, but having to take out Kelly was basically us just designing ourselves into a corner. Just implementing an interesting encounter with him was challenging enough, and we just ran out of time trying to find a way to make a non-lethal encounter with him that was interesting and not buggy. We said that before, he's probably like the weakest part of the game is probably that boss fight. But at the very least, it's brief. I think Deus Ex, Human Revolution, like the newer ones, the one I played, boss fights are a bit of a problem in the same way there. For a stealth game, it can be very difficult to make a boss fight seem that fits in without it just becoming a combat game. I think Batman probably did it pretty well. Remember, like the Scarecrow fight, it was more like a stealth challenge than it was a fight. Kelly is named after Ned Kelly, an Australian bushranger who was something of a Robin Hood figure. Ned's gang is infamous for fashioning suits of improvised plate armour, weighing over 40 kilograms to protect themselves from law enforcement. The armour didn't cover much below the waist, though. In fact, the police in Glenrowan exploited to capture the outlaw by shooting him in the legs. Kelly was hanged in Melbourne Gaol in 1880. Kelly's body was dissected by medical students, and the skull was rumoured to have been given to the police, who used it as a paperweight for a time. Eventually it was returned to Melbourne's Gaol, where it was on display until it was stolen in 1978. Despite some false claims, the skull has never been recovered. The rest of Kelly's remains were reburied at Pentridge Prison after the old Melbourne Gaol graveyard was accidentally unearthed during renovations in 1929. The unearthed bodies were just placed unceremoniously in a mass grave in Pentridge. But in 2011, Kelly's skeleton was exhumed and transferred to distant relatives who had them buried properly near his mother's grave. Kelly's armour is still on display at the State Library of Victoria. And there's your history minute about Australian outlaws. Who said you never learn anything from video games? Nah, I love that stuff. I don't know anything about that. That's really cool. A lot of people have commented on the fluidity of the ninja character animation. Very early on in production, Jeff and I agreed we wanted to contrast the ninja with the goons in terms of fluid versus stiff movement. To that end, we prototyped the gameplay using hand-drawn animation and roughed out much of the ninja's animation states before committing to the Flash-built system we normally use. One of the chief reasons we didn't just take the hand-drawn approach to completion was a simple matter of texture budget. The ninja has far too much animation for that. When I interviewed for a programming job on Mark and Ninja, one of the questions I was asked was how I would find the area representing the line of sight from a point in a 2D level. For example, what could a player in a specific position see, or what would be lit by a light? I guess the answer I gave at the time was good enough since I was hired, but the moment of truth came later in the project, when by coincidence I had to do exactly that. There were bugs in the way we calculated our lights, so they flickered or ended up shining in completely the wrong direction. I ended up rewriting that calculation entirely, and it was way better than the answer I gave in my interview. Aww. Really interesting game, by the way, or thing, by the way, in the industry. No matter what you've done or studied, it is the hands-on understanding of implementation that is way more likely to get you a job in the industry itself. Like whether you studied at university, college or not, trying to make stuff on your own is what will do the best for you. From what I understand. Again, I failed completely, so it's not like I am an expert on the matter. But I follow and read up on enough and hear enough stories from folks. It's the one you're reading right now. Constant Ford in our size was getting correct and performant line of sight queries. Many systems, including the lighting, fog of war, physics, and AI, would need line of sight information many times a frame. In addition, the query had to be executed slightly differently depending on who was asking. Lighting and fog of war, for example, would need to ignore transparent materials. Physics could not. One-way platforms also behaved in various ways with respect to line of sight, depending on what worked best for the gameplay. Chris Costa. Again, programming is terrifying. It's tough to write incidental dialogue for the player to hear while they're moving through a level. At least it's tough when the level isn't built yet. We wrote and scrapped a lot of exposition for the next level because there was no place for it. Laura's lines here, where she starts to make you suspicious of his eye, fit the level, and the musty sense of despair that fills Carradine's castle. Now, I think her little bits of dialogue to instill that bit of doubt worked really well. Lighting in the game was a little experiment I thought might be interesting, and it turned out to be one of my favourite mechanics. Interestingly, we made the sound come before the light in order to warn the player of impending danger. We wondered how many people would pick up on the backwards physics, as the light travelled from lighting moves much faster than the sound it creates, but as of yet, I haven't heard a peep. Jamie Cheng. That's an interesting little tidbit. We made a very conscious decision early on that audio shouldn't follow reality if it got in the way of gameplay. That's another thing. Pulling back on realism so it better fits the game and how it plays for the player. You see it a lot in the industry. One of the big ways this manifested was thunder preceding the lightning. We needed something to tell the player the lightning was coming, and an audio cue was the perfect way to do this. So we broke physics and played a small thunder sample preceding the large lightning. Pardon me. And thunder that allows the ninja to be spotted. I remember one review called this out on how far we went to put gameplay first. It was a really good bit. It was really fun learning to stealth around that too. An issue that came up early on in level design was how to create interesting puzzles but also have spaces that just feel like real places and not just a random assortment of platforms hanging in the air. I knew that the tile sets could be used in ways to create spaces that felt like rooms and buildings, but it was difficult to communicate with the level designers, so I ended up with a lot of gamey looking levels. While I was painting the tile set for World 2, I got sick and had to spend a couple of days at home. The computer was out of commission and I was thinking about this problem, so I sat down and sketched out some rough designs of how I imagined the tile set would look when I put it back together properly as a castle. I wasn't sure if it was going to be helpful or not. I showed them to Jamie, and the drawings ended up taped on the wall near the designers. From there we realised that if I and Aaron briefly created rough levels using the tile sets, designers had a much easier time creating structures that felt grounded in the world, and sharing and slapping stuff on a wall for everyone to draw inspiration from. It's good stuff. Right, hang on, before we get to the next one, I'm just going to take myself a quick bio break. Been going about 40 minutes now, and my throat's a little sore as well. I'm going to have a good old swig of water. Just going to tippity type it into the chat. Oh, hang on. It was that one I was on. Yeah. Tappity tappity tap tap. Again, I know it'd probably be a lot more interesting and easier to digest if I was going through it at the same time, but I knew I didn't want to do a full other New Game Plus playthrough. I've got a lot of games in my backlog, so I didn't want to draw it out, just hit these when I could spend some time going through and reading them. I know it might be frustrating to some people, but this is something I'd have probably done on my own as well. So with that, stretch your legs, refill your beverage. I'll be right back with you in a few minutes. See you soon. And we're back. Thank you for your patience. Let's continue our read through. Our level editor, called the Shanker, as it was originally built for Shank, is an amazing tool. It was built primarily by a single programmer, Chris Costa. Without its might, we could never have hoped to complete Ninja. That's something else, especially for indie games. You see them build from game to game. Look at something like Baldur's Gate 3, and if you haven't, go back and give a go to Divinity Original Sin 2, because I absolutely adore that game, and Original Sin 1, and you can see the building blocks that would eventually lead to Baldur's Gate 3, and what I'm so interested in seeing what they do next. Because Sven and the team at Larian seem very excited by it, but you see this a lot in, like, you look at Supergiant as well, between Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, going on to Hades, you can see that thread, that through line of ideas and pipelines of working and tools at their disposal that get better over time again and again. Even something like From Software, it doesn't have to be indie games. Like, you see the bones of Demon Souls all the way through to Elden Ring. It's remarkable stuff. For example, this level used to begin in the next room. When we wanted to add the Farsight ability, we wanted to have an encounter that would convey its use. Plus, we just wanted more of an opening to the level in general, rather than launching directly into a more challenging encounter. Adding that beginning section via Shanker and making it seamlessly sync up with the rest of the level was quite painless. Everyone on the team knows that Chris is an absolute lord. Aww. The poison gas hazard was introduced here. Without any real explanation or tutorial, it was mean. Aside from a one line of VO from Aura, I don't think we ever saw folks have trouble with it in playtesting. I strongly believe that over-tutorializing is a major design crutch and an ugly trend in general, and we tried to make things as self-evident as possible. Obviously, we still had some tutorial explanation moments, but we tried very hard to minimize it as much as possible. We see that a lot in modern games, over-tutorializing to hell, like players need to be handheld, or you're assuming, you don't want to say like worst case scenario that you just assume all your players are stupid. Like, I always try and think maybe you're thinking your player base is like a certain age, you know, or it might be their first game and they need this kind of tutorial. But I think organic explanations work a lot better because they just make sense. Like having green gas about falling into it and your health go down, so, oh no, this is poison, I need to get out, it is hurting me. Like, that creates that learning moment without the need for a tutorial. In Mark of Ninja, guards don't hear sounds. Sounds hear guards. What does this mean? Oh no, programming again. Instead of each character in the game continually checking to see if there are things around them they should notice, such as noises, broken lights, or dead bodies, actually those things that check to see if there are characters nearby that should notice them. For example, a dead body lying on the ground will continually check if there are any characters nearby that are looking in its direction. If it's determined that the character should see the body, their eye is updated with an interest in this new object, and they set off to investigate it. Doing things this way allows us to pull off some tricks like easily grouping up multiple characters together that see or hear the same object at the same time, and having them react differently if they were alone. See, those are the things that, that's why, for one, programming is so terrifying to me, just because of how you kind of, there are tricks to it, and you can see folks, especially like speedrunners, stuff like that, really exploit how these things are built, and those small, unknown intricacies that can be really hard to discover and understand, but I find it endlessly fascinating. I just wish I understood it in the creating it a little better, and all the numbers and sheets that just drove me mad. The more broken down environments like the desert ruins and the castle catacombs, it was especially important to disguise the original Lego blocks look of the platforms, adding in lots of details, broken windows, slanted ceilings, hanging debris, and offsetting art from the grid helped to achieve the more haphazard than natural look we were going for. Kelly Graham. I think they succeeded there as well. Mark of the Ninja ended up having a lot of speech. Seriously, a lot. The game shipped with over 3,800 lines, not counting dialogue that was used in cutscenes or that was produced but cut from the game. This is right up there with a lot of disc-based games, let alone a downloadable title. The reason we produced so much dialogue was we really didn't want our guards to sound stupid and repetitive. The human brain's so hardwired to pick out speech, the only way to trick it is to have a ton of different lines. This became a real challenge when it came to acting and writing lines. I mean, just how many ways can you say, I think that light got broken? It's a really interesting thing too. Again, it's one of those small details that you only notice in its absence. Like if a game's got voice lines that go on repeatedly, constantly, you notice that way sooner than you notice so many done so smoothly. Absolutely got to give them props to that. The catacombs in this level are different from any other level because they're exclusively underground and indoors. These spaces looked really flat and dark when we first put down the tile sets, so we were happy to come up with a way to make it look less crappy. Originally, the idea was to put glowy technology on the walls, something I was only going to do in World 1. However, it crept into all of the underground spaces. The interiors that are above ground have windows to add contrast to the dark walls, and to add some depth to the background. Normally, the underground areas are too close to the above ground areas to add in parallax. Since this level is all underground, we were able to cut some big chunks out of the back walls to reveal some mid-ground, add some depth and atmosphere to the level. Again, I think it worked really well. Mechanically, this level is about riding around the crates. Yep, we know about the riding around crates level and fall into too many traps. Many games prioritise reuse of mechanics like this. The mindset is that once dev time has been spent to make it, and player time has been spent to understand it, it should be a recurring element. While I understand that, it can be dangerous to be slavish about it. The crates don't show up much outside of this level, and I'm kind of fine with that. It makes the level feel distinct and have a gameplay identity I think it might not have had otherwise. I think that works really well. Again, it's a lot of as you said, it's a lot of dev time, and you want to get the most out of the assets you've created, but overdoing something, then suddenly it's everywhere. I think that is a criticism we can level very clearly at Dragon Age Veilguard, is how many times we had to bust those blight bubbles, for example. Like that became something that was just a constant and then used in like later game boss fights. It didn't feel interesting or special because it was happening all the bloody time. Again, restraint being very important. I think this level went through the most design pause of any level. I initially did the layout for the level, then Jason spent some time with it, while Simon did most of the implementation of the ending sequence. It was totally 3 men and a baby, but with much less Tom Selleck moustache and more crates and poison gas. A reference that I'm afraid, Nels, has gone over my head. Aura conveniently disappears at the beginning of the level, only to appear at the end. We didn't want to autopilot her through all the levels, strange layout and crates. We also didn't want her to just reappear suddenly from time to time. We figured the alternate route would explain away her absence sufficiently without calling attention to anything. More broadly, we didn't want Aura's voice to magically appear out of nowhere. We made a point of having her occasionally appear in the levels, even though sometimes you'll hear her VO without her being on screen. Fortunately, the trope of having some guiding radio voice in the player's ear is so well established almost no one thinks twice about it. We tried to turn that to our advantage at the end of the game, where Aura's mysterious comings and goings and ability to always talk next ninja are given proper context. As we say, by the end of the game it feels like she is the part of the tattoo's demon to get you through. I still don't know at what point in the game was she ever truly there. That's still a mystery to me. Or whether it was left up in the air to begin with. The feel of the ninja's platforming had a lot of attention given to it. Over the entire course of the game's development, combat designer Marcus spent countless hours tweaking and tuning values to make it feel just right to be running, jumping, climbing around corners and moving through vents like a ninja. Tefham Johnson. I think they handled that wonderfully as well. There are a couple times where it feels a little sticky to say maybe like try and slide down from a wall above an enemy to get behind them properly, but I think by the end of the game we about managed it. For whatever reason, the geometry in this room was especially hard on the code that generated the lighting, causing flashlights to overlap. I'm glad they've got some context pictures, by the way, to the side, given that we're reading through this. That was a nice little addition. Themselves in strange ways and generally just look wrong. This was one of my go-to spots in the game when I wanted to test my latest lighting changes, because if it worked here, it would work anywhere. I even made a copy of the whole level and deleted everything except this room, just so I could quickly load it up to test while I was working. And it's finding those little pipeline shortcuts. Fascinating stuff. The large guard voice went through two full iterations before we found the right voice for him. We recorded, edited, and implemented one set of recordings before we realised it wasn't right. Our actor had delivered exactly what we asked for, but we had told him the wrong direction. So back to the studio we went. Just like the rest of the game, everything had to be right, even if it meant throwing out a bunch of work. If it wasn't doing great, or if it wasn't doing the game right. You see this a lot. Like, again, even to bring up Dragon Age. The direction you give to the voice actor might be great in mind, but if the direction overall is wrong, when it all comes together in the end, that's when you see it. And if there's not enough development time to then go back and re-record, you screw yourselves. And you're locked in with it. And that's why it felt odd sometimes when, say, Nev in Veilguard, her direction and delivery felt really good in specifically some of her, like, personal story scenes. And then in the main scenes, or some of the, like, idle banter, it just didn't hit the same. It seemed like it was different direction. The lighting parallel is a result of a process we developed for Shank 2. In Shank 2 we painted everything in grayscale and then coloured it in our level editor using gradient maps. This allowed us to reuse art assets between levels without having to recolour them. A gradient map is a tool where you can map different colours onto a grayscale gradient. It will replace the grayscale tones in your image with the new colours. For example, if you map blue to the black end of the scale, all your blacks will be replaced by blue. The light cones in Mark and Ninja are all gradient maps that recolour all the blacks and dark tones as orange and yellows. Ooh. Lovely way to get around doing it. Like, again, work smarter, not harder. I don't know if that's how the saying goes. Someone will correct me, I'm sure. Similar to the last two levels in the previous world, this level and the next one were one gigantic level. Well, once one gigantic level. I also split these levels in two, both for pacing and for our own sanity building them. I can't remember if it was before we split the levels up or after. But this half also used to have a huge underground area that was filled with fiery traps and other boiler furnace things. The idea is the player could choose if they wanted to go above or below to reach the helipad. The fiery area just felt kind of gamey though. I think it was absolutely brutal on performance. There's still a bit of that over-under path, but far less now. And for the better, I think. I'd kind of like to see a big boilery furnace. I see what you mean, like, you do get that in game, the snow level, the forest level, the fire level, the desert level, the water level. You know what I mean? You do often see people hit those marks. So again, I think just restraint all the way through is one thing we're seeing in a lot of these designs. The objective where you have to sabotage the helicopter was explicitly set up to have both violent and non-lethal means of success. We tried to do the same with the optional objectives, but we ended up just not having enough design space to make them interesting. Feasible, no matter how the player was approaching the enemies. That's definitely one of the challenges in making a game that emphasises player choice in gameplay style. You have to be relatively generic in terms of goals because the designer can never know how the player will be approaching any given challenge. Like we'll go over, do the non-lethal option, and then stab the guy anyway, because I'm a monster. Several of the levels started out with pushing block puzzles, but many of them were removed because it just didn't feel right to have a badass silent stealthy ninja who has to push blocks around. Still a little bit of block pushing, but there's elements of larger encounters rather than something that feels entirely like a block pushing puzzle. I can imagine it in a room where if we had to do like 4, 5, 6 of those at once, it would have felt extremely overbearing. For the better part of a year, we had a minimap in the corner of the screen at all times, but it never really proved to be all that useful. Lots of people playing didn't even notice it while they were playing, or didn't bother to look at it once they did. It also didn't show enough context to really be helpful. Ultimately, it was removed from the game. One of the few major tech features in which time was invested that ended up being discarded. A lot of work that just never got used. I kind of liked that you just hit a button and you got the map in this game. I think it varies game to game hugely. Like, again, a recent example being Dragon Age. I wish that minimap was just a little bit more zoomed out to be more useful. I approach the challenge rooms as areas that exist inside the ninja's mind. The background art is a combination of some windows and platform art from the real world, and patterns based on the ninja's tools, or tattoos. Ooh. They are the areas where we could get away with having really gamey spaces, and it would still feel like a normal part of the game. Although it's nice to mix it up a bit, these rooms cause a lot of difficulty in the design process. It was really tricky to make them actually fun, not just frustrating. Looking back, I have a feeling that the freedom to do whatever we wanted with the space might have actually caused a lot of the frustration in the level design. Sometimes constraints inspire more creativity than a blank page. We've seen that reflected in a lot of their comments going through so far. And they certainly, when you drop into those levels, they they load in, you get that brief camera pan informing you of what's ahead, and it feels like, oh, this is the puzzle bit rather than a level I'm exploring. I suppose that is the nature of a challenge room, though. There's a lot of time we thought the level structure of Mark and Ninja was going to be much less linear than the one we ended up with. An early idea was to have 6 worlds, where each represented a clash between the old world and the new world in a different paradigm: economic, environmental, artistic, political, spiritual, and technological, and be able to move almost freely between them. Obviously, this is very different from the structure we ended up with, but the key idea that we took from this was the clash of the traditional ninja clan fitting into the new technology world of the Hassan Corporation. Pretty amazing how far we departed from what we thought Mark and Ninja was going to be. That process ended up giving us one of our main themes. Again, knowing when to scrap your ideas and to be flexible with it. Again, that first one sounds like that really initial ambitious pitch that you realise you really have to pull back on because it's too much. The design of this final encounter with Karajin went through a number of different iterations. It's a bit tricky when you're trying to create something that was the climactic feel of a boss fight when that boss is just, well, a guy. We ended up settling on this, where the challenge is getting to the boss rather than dispatching him. Yeah, we said earlier as well, it felt good to get to him at that point. The player enters this walking state mostly because of all the things the player could do to Karajin otherwise. What if the player throws a spike mine at him, a terror dart, a smoke bomb? This Karajin wasn't a normal enemy. We would have had to custom build all of those reactions. It's a touch unfortunate that we had to funnel the possibilities here, but I'm glad the weeks of work literally required to deal with all those possible edge cases were allocated elsewhere instead. Aye, another bit of restraint there. Having it just make you go and stab him not only works more thematically with the game, it removes this problem. We added the pickpocket mechanic later when we realised we hadn't provided a non-lethal way to accomplish this level. Again, we felt Karajin was an important thematic exception to that. We ended up porting it back to the 3rd level where you can pickpocket the tracking device. And again, it worked quite well. Take a swig of my beverage. Oh, I think we're about halfway there. Goodness me. Appreciate those who are coming on this little dev journey with me and learning a bit more about not just this game, but it's important to get these understandings for any game and understand just how much goes into it. I think folks online these days are so quick to just scream that the devs are useless and lazy when even a small team like this has so much to consider and so much to do to get things to just work in the state they end up in, and to work so well in this game's case. I think very rarely does someone get into video game design, a place where corporations exploit the passions of its workers consistently for most of the industry's life. You know, I don't think it's an uncommon story. Like myself, most people who play games, especially at a young age, will be like, man, I want to make these one day. It's always worth remembering there's a person doing so. Well, the cutscene makes it feel like we're just loading a different level. We actually just teleport the player to the Hisomi-jo location built floating in the sky in the corner of the level. Initially we just had it fade to black and you appeared here, but this felt too jarring. So we added that brief cutscene to convey that change in place and time. We disabled the map screen at this point, so you don't see you're floating in some weird area. These kind of tricks are quite common in games. Hopefully it doesn't glimpse behind the curtain, doesn't wreck the illusion. No, more glimpses, Nils. More glimpses, please. These spawner doors were created very early as a reason for the ninja to avoid raising an alarm. They were used a lot in the 2nd or 3rd prototype we submitted to the publisher, but here is one of the only places they ended up in the final game. Crafting specific scenarios of individual guards ended up being far preferable than having guards spawn in randomly. 100% would agree with that. Dosan became a favourite character of mine very quickly, thanks to Michael Dobson's great voice acting in combination with Jeff's design. Considering how much I liked his character, I really didn't get to animate him all that much. In the end production, I took a couple of days to do a little tribute, inspired by Samurai Jack, Cartoon Network logo, to give him his own little spotlight with Dosan. Aww. I think that speaks really well to the fact that they did the Dosan's Tale bit down the line. As a programmer, I didn't spend as much time as I should have actually playing the game until it was nearly complete. It's easy to get tunnel vision looking at only the parts of the game that I'm working on at the moment. We hear this a lot as well within the industry. It can be very hard within teams to understand where the rest of the game's at when you're so tunnel visioned on what you're doing. Like, think of any game that has done really poorly over the years, and the poor bugger who's just been making crates the whole time, modelling them out perfectly, texturing them, whatnot, to learn that, oh, this game's actually not turned out that great. They might have had absolutely no idea till the day of release. As a result, I didn't really know anything about the World 3 levels until they were mostly complete design and art-wise. When I finally did manage to carve out the time to play through the whole game, it was a pleasant surprise to come into this new environment after staring at World 1 and 2 environments for so long. Not only, was it great to see new visuals, but the traps and bombs forced me to rethink the way I was playing. It gave me a new appreciation for experimenting with gameplay instead of just playing the most familiar way I knew about from all my time quickly testing my own work. Absolutely. I think that jump to that third set of world, as they say, really so many traps. We never gave Ninja a backstory, but from his eyes monologue, you could guess that the Hisomu clan, now fallen on hard times, picks its new recruits from the dregs of society. Ninja was probably an orphan or street kid who was picked up by the clan, and has never known any other way of life. In some rough sketches, I also imagine that Oro was either a sister or a stranger who helped Ninja at a key point in his life, probably when he was young and helpless. Chris Dalen. See, that leads me to believe that she was a real person, so when did she die? Did we kill her? What happened there? Previous to the full-scale speech demo that I did for the game, we had samples recorded in-house with one of our own artists. These samples were in-game for a while, and despite, or maybe because of, their horribleness, the whole team got attached to them. As the design went along, they didn't even make sense anymore in the context of most levels, but we found they would still fit here. So we had Vince, our VO talent for these guards, redo 2 of the original lines, complete with copying our artist's accent and delivery. Must have been animal. No, these are the moments I wish I could see where this actual commentary clip was being played. But I still love these little details. Just the nature of design changes, we were recording new dialogue fairly late in development. You hear that a lot as well. While we had wonderful and flexible actors and recording studio, we started to run into scheduling conflicts. So we decided to bring our recordings in-house. I'd always recorded all my lines at my home studio to begin with, so I wasn't afraid of mixing locations and not being able to get it to match. The money we would have spent on studio rental went into purchasing sound treatment for our small testing room. After spending a day hanging acoustic panels on the wall on the room, sound was pretty good other than a mysterious ringing sound. It turned out the air duct was resonating with a horrible tone. So now, before each recording session, I hang the packing blankets, cover the TV, and stuff my office sweater in the duct to dampen it and remove the ringing. Oh, bless. Little workarounds to deal with such things. When we started Mark and Ninja, the project was just called Modern Ninja, unlike the Shank universe, which took shape within 1 week. We had just a vague idea of a ninja in a modern world. First we thought it might be a pulpy American ninja sort of thing. Contemplated having him be a war veteran. I'm really glad we didn't go in that direction. Eventually we determined that if you put Ninja's universe on a scale of 1 to 10 from reality to fantasy, it would sit at about a 5. Locations will be based on the real world stuff, heavily exaggerated. There was one afternoon, and Jeff and I were sitting in his office trying to figure out the direction we wanted to take. We just started brainstorming stuff that would be fun to make. Literally, we were saying stuff like, let's make a castle city and a desert city and a temple city. It sounds stupid, but it at least got the ball rolling. We created fiction from there. Sometimes it's helped just to think of stuff that's fun and uncomplicated, and then figure out how to make it fit. Aw, love that. In addition to the 4th level where you create the burning building distraction, this is the other level where we wanted to make things feel non-linear. We still wanted to avoid moments where the player felt confused or lost though. So we anchored the level at the room where Dosan is captured, and the player chooses to go clockwise or counterclockwise. Yes, I remember this quite distinctly. When we did this though, we discovered another problem in playtesting. It was easy to accidentally miss objectives and end up really far away from them. So we added the occasional VO and brief camera pushes just so the player would realise when they were nearing one of the objectives. It's a nice little touch. I think it's important to ensure the game's tone and atmosphere match its mechanics in the Ruins world. I wanted to feel unstable and unreliable to upset the player's previous confidence in concordance with the story at this point, so we added new traps and hazards like perch points that crumble and platforms and walls that break away after the player contacts them. Aye, very devious indeed. One tremendously edifying moment was during playtesting. I asked the participant if they had any thoughts about these levels after our session, and he basically described exactly what we had intended with regard to things feeling unstable and unreliable. It was almost word for word what I'd written in an overview of these two levels. Pretty satisfying, that. I can imagine. Nailed it. We added the sandstorm hazard to further remove the player's confidence in one of their key advantages, the ability to see the enemy before they can be seen. Initially, we had even grander plans for this, with the ability to break windows and have the sandstorm blow into buildings and blind enemies. It ended up being too tricky to implement, both technically and artistically though, so we opted with just having the sandstorm be active when the player is outside the buildings, which I think ended up being stronger anyway. Aye, restraint, there again. That's good direction, good management, I think. As you may have noticed, we used lasers to great effect in previous levels. However, high-tech lasers didn't fit the feel for this level. Instead we opted for tripwires that would trigger various traps when the player contacted them. While this seems like the same thing, they're actually much trickier to use well. They can't move, they can't be turned off with power, etc. Both Jason and I had to really stretch to come up with interesting challenges that utilised the rope traps. It was some fun. They were more useful in blowing up the cards though than they were me. Sniper enemies were one of the first we knew we wanted, but one of the last to be implemented in the game. Making them dynamically animate to smoothly follow the point they're aiming was no small feat. Again, something so small and simple. There's no concept of skeletons in our animations. Each individual part of the guard, gun, upper arm, lower arm is rotated to the point at the position based on their relative rotation in the original animation. More complicated than you'd think, isn't it? The level construction in World 3 has a lot more curves, arches and organic shapes than the rest of the game, especially in the underground areas. Curves aren't actually supported by the level editor, and the level's artists just approximate them using multiple small angle changes. Additionally, one of the very first tasks I had when I joined Clay at the beginning of Mark and the Ninja was to allow characters to walk on the ceiling, and that code definitely didn't account for a smooth curving walls at the time. There was a fair amount of tweaking and bug fixing that went into these levels to strike a balance between the walls and ceilings looking natural versus the limitations and capabilities of the engine. Again, it's these programming ones that just make my mind go, ah! But well done. Camera panning in open areas caused level streaming issues on certain hardware. Oh no, the other side of programming too. Actually dealing with different specs. Due to the extensive background parallax we employ, a lot of texture data sometimes had to be streamed in quickly during fast cinematic camera pans. This became a balancing act as we tweaked the zoom level, camera speed and level art to make sure everything was visible at the right time, without blowing up the game. Azai's audio logs aren't a haiku so much as a haibun, a mix of prose and poetry. Though even using that label is probably stretching it. This was Azai's biggest chance to explain his side of the story, make him appear sympathetic, so it was important to let him speak clearly. We spent a lot of time discussing how to strike this balance, of letting our chief antagonist also be a sympathetic character, who's doing something dishonest for the greater good of his clan. Hopefully these logs help him make his case. It certainly did start filling me with more doubt, like it wasn't just our friend Oro who's talking to us, it is, we are getting a more clearer picture of this side of the story, which did give me pause in that final choice. The death poem is a form that I discovered while I was researching Japanese poetry. Like the name says, it's a poem you would write when the end was near. For example, here is Totoyome is Hideyoshi's. Appearing like dew, vanishing like dew. Such is my life, even now as splendor is a dream within a dream. Chris Dalen. I do love stuff like that, especially when it's pulled from history. Each level is composed of nearly 20 different layers of art, helping to create depth in the 2D space and a subtle balance of lighting and colour. There are multiple levels of background buildings intertwined with mist effects. The interiors use several layers for decor, colour effects and shadowing. While at the platform level, Ninja weaves behind silhouetted layers of pillars and railings. As the game progresses, more and more layers of moving hallucination effects appear. Solid black masses of buildings turned out to be distracting, and were later broken up with a faint layer of pipes and wooden debris in the walls. Kelly Graham. The location for 3 took form because Jeff and I liked the idea of a desert city that was once huge and great, but now run down and lawless. The idea that this is where the ink came from happened afterwards. World 3 is the first time that hallucinations show up in the real world. It's difficult to see the faint layer of tattoo clouds panning through the background because the sandstorm is pretty opaque, but they are there. We also wanted this world to feel far away from the previous locations because the ninja has broken away from the clan for the first time. We thought it would suit the emotional tone if he was physically far away. I think it worked really well, and I really like those levels, as AJ saying so earlier. I took a bit of a risk with this level, taking the player's weapon away. I'd wanted a very explicit change of pace, where the player felt pursued and disempowered. I wanted players who hadn't been playing non-lethally to try that style in addition to emphasising the Serenity ability. Aye, that teleport's great. Often in their late stages in stealth games especially, players will be given some tremendously powerful ability that undercuts the stealth gameplay and turns them into a roaring tempest of death or makes them completely invisible and silent. To go the other way would have turned out wrong, but based on the reaction, I think most folks enjoyed the change of pace. I'd have to agree. It forces you out of the comfort zone you've built, and as long as it's still fun to play, players are happy to make that jump, I feel. Stalkers were meant to be the scariest adversary the player would face because they have the same locomotion abilities as the player. In general, the player is able to stay hidden because they can reach and move across through spaces the enemies cannot. The Stalkers took that advantage away, and it worked magnificently. Final tattoo ability changed a few times during development. It started as a straight teleport, became a mid-air super dash, then stopped time completely while letting the ninja move freely, finally settled on the parabolic throwing teleport effect. Amazingly, the puzzles in this part of the level for training the player in their new ability remained largely unchanged between implementations. Interesting. I guess that saved them on a lot of redoing the work. It is just a movement ability, it's just getting one that feels right, and I think they landed on the right one for sure. The Stalker enemies ended up being a lot of work, and took a long time before they started feeling right. We wanted them to be able to go anywhere the ninja could go, but even then they took so long to run there they didn't feel threatening enough. Eventually we made their attacks so devastating that keeping them at a distance was the best way to deal with them. Fair. Midway through the development of the game, we decided to introduce civilians as another goon type that was non-lethal. We heard about this earlier. But very alertable. It wasn't long before they were scrapped. Rather than waste all the animation work we had done, we decided to skin the civilian and use that build for the other ninja buddies in the game. Hence the term civilian ninja was coined, and seemed fairly apt, as they kept getting offed in the later levels. So if you observe the ninja in the very first level ringing the bell, he still has the red collar belonging to the civilian character build. Subway trains. Stress the audio system to limits performance-wise. Fascinating. That's another thing that within programming, that just adding sound hits performance in really big ways. I couldn't have designed a better worst-case test if I had tried, and I had. Many moving and constantly updating sounds for the trains and other effects in addition to the regular sounds like footsteps, combined with a lot of tight zigzag tunnels, all in a relatively small area. This area prompted its own round of optimizations and fixes required to cope with the amount of stuff going on here. Again, terrifying programming. Terrifying. Visually, the Return is my favourite level. The art was really fun to put together because there were so many new elements to design. We created completely new art for the subways and the clan's hidden areas. We got to creepily distribute the hallucination effects throughout the space. The opening of this level is so great. The sky is swirling with inky patterns and no one is around. and you creep into the old tunnels through these traps and start seeing melting faces on the walls. I love it. Throughout the production, I think I missed a lot of that hallucination stuff, mainly because I was panicking with stealth. I got some of it though. That aspect of the character slowly losing it to more of those hallucinations, I think it was just a really interesting both story, design and gameplay thing. Throughout the production, we'd always planned to gradually add hallucinations to the environments. They were one of the last things added to the game. I had an idea of how I wanted it to look. The final level went through so many iterations that it was difficult to make any decisions. I was worried that adding in creepy faces to the background was too cliche a device to represent someone losing their mind. I'm glad they end up being a part of the game design instead of just a thing in the background. Despite the fact that they aren't real, they are a part of the ninja's reality. Making the guards and puzzles part of the hallucinations makes them part of the player's reality as well. The final world was really fun to make, and all the new tools that were added to the level editor helped this out. It's great to have programmers who can give you the tools you dream up. Aww. That's different parts of the studio working together for the whole of it, knowing what you can do for each other and push out. We didn't want the only enemies in this level to be stalkers. I also felt it didn't make any sense that you'd return to your secret ninja HQ only for there to be all kinds of normal guards. Why would Hessian be working with the clan when they just assassinated Karajan, its leader? Instead, we opted to have the guards transform into dead ninja when they are killed. The notion being that the tattoos are causing the ninja to hallucinate and imagine foes, where instead it's merely his terrified kin. The effect is pretty subtle. I'm not sure. You know what? I don't think I noticed that it transformed into ninja as they felt. I thought they just kind of went poof into smoke. Maybe there was a little more in there. I hope it was rewarding for those that did. In some games, this moment would be a big reveal with dramatic music and a cutscene or something, but I wanted this to be a subtle and restrained, let the player's reaction to it be organic versus something informed by the game's presentation. After the game's release, a writer at themarysue.com wrote a great piece about her reaction to this. I hope it was similarly effective for other folks that noticed it. I almost feel bad for not noticing it now. Damn. Earlier we imagined the second half of this level would just be a big dramatic chase, where you're following Isaiah through his Hisumi Joe. This didn't really work when we implemented it though. One, as soon as the player feels the time pressure, they feel rushed and start making mistakes. It doesn't encourage the kind of intentional, thoughtful gameplay we wanted. And two, it made the encounter with Isaiah very adversarial. We really didn't want him to just feel like the bad guy. Instead, we just used the old training room as a pseudo-climax and made the time pressure about staying undetected instead of moving quickly. I think that one worked alright. We just ended up kind of hiding at the top of the room and throwing spike traps down. Designing this level meant we needed to give the stalker enemies more information about their surroundings so they could realistically search for the ninja. We developed a way to mark up the vents in the level so the enemies could know how to follow the ninja into a vent and out the other side to look for him. Very scary. The final training room represented the climax of the player's skill of hiding and moving, but it, was also the climax of the AI navigation tech. Patrols for the stalkers in this room exercised almost every special case we had for pathfinding. Once they were able to navigate effectively around the room, we knew this could work in other levels. Oh, good stuff. One moment. Throughout the game, we try to introduce the case that Aura and Azai will make. Should Ninja go along with a dishonest plan in order to save what's left of the clan? Or does Azai's dishonesty give Ninja an excuse to leave and save his own skin? Neither choice is right. We spent a lot of time trying to balance them out. In fact, we were worried that almost everyone would just side with Aura, especially because it meant they wouldn't have to give up their own lives. I think that's a very fair criticism. It's certainly, we immediately gravitated to her. It took all the way up until the final bits of his dialogue through the scrolls to even start changing my mind. It was pretty late in the game where it was really like, hang on, are we the baddie? You know what I mean? And ultimately, while I did go with Aura for our initial, what I'd call a canon ending, it was interesting going back and seeing the other one too. Early on, the team promoted the idea of commissioning a song to use in a memorable way at the end of the game. Ideally, it would feature a Japanese singer. I found Yamataka Sonic Titan in a feature on pitchfork.com, and their debut ep won us over. This Toronto-based band describes themselves as a psychedelic, no-wave opera group fusing noise, metal, pop and folk music into a multidisciplinary hyper-oriental cesspool of East meets West culture clash. My gods. In other words, a perfect fit. We commissioned the song Mark and Blade and used it to soundtrack the surreal final sequence of the game. To be fair, we did even comment on that at the time. It was a wonderful piece to use. We're hitting the end of it now. The final level to us culminated in what the game is ultimately about. All of us make decisions based on limited information without full knowledge of their consequences. Having the ending not tell the player what ultimately happened past their immediate action was a hard decision, but ultimately, it was in service of this. We didn't want the player to know more information than their ninja, otherwise they could simply reload and choose the correct answer. The point for us is that there is often no correct answer. You have to make choices based on whatever you know, however limited that is. And I think they nailed that, because that's what we immediately did. We did one ending, and I went, right, let me reload it and see what the other actually tells us and informs us. And it turns out it didn't give us any more information. It is just, what from that point on did you want to choose? I still think there could have been a little bit more in the way of Azai's side of things. Just a little bit more. It was a little late to give me sympathy towards him, but I still think it was handled remarkably well. Yamataka and Sonic Titan wrote us a great song that we used here in the final level. It's really helped us set the level apart from the rest of the game. They nailed that for sure. I ended up spending quite a deal of time balancing the elements and timing of this level. There aren't a lot of elements. They needed to be perfect in their delivery. It needs to sound good when you walk straight through the level. Also, if you pause along the way. I always liked how the soundscape of this level turned out. I would agree. Final's level was designed so many times. There was always a plan to do some custom pieces for this level. I painted many. I threw them out. The actual level that is in the game didn't take long to put together. It just took a long time to get there. Jamie really wanted it to feel stark, and it was his idea to use the plain white background. I'd always been playing with the idea that this was a culmination of the ninja's insanity, and so I was pushing for the hallucinations to be added. I think that doing something tonally different to other hallucinations worked well to highlight the deeds of the ninja throughout the game. I would agree with that too. The original design of this level had you choosing between Azai and Aura early on, which would then funnel you into a series of challenges. If you chose Aura, there was a series of surreal challenge room-esque levels where you're chasing Aura until you finally catch her. With Azai, you would drop a smoke bomb and you'd have to chase him through a larger building area until you finally reached a room where he was sitting drinking tea, resigned to his fate. Ultimately, we found the end with gameplay tone just didn't work. We opted with something slower, more deliberate, more of a real denouement. I think we all love how it turned out. I know I do. Oh, that was not credited, interestingly. Tale from the past. Oh, the Dosans thing now, I think. Again, I need to double check when this actually came out. Hang on. I want to do this now before I forget. Just so I'm more aware of the context. If it did come out in the remaster or if it came out just as like a pseudo DLC later. Or if it came out initially. Let me see. Found the wiki article. Now, for the special edition, new behind the scenes insights. So that came with Dosan and then these developer commentaries. Okay. For this level, I'm actually going to explain the step-by-step process we went through to build a Mark of the Ninja level, strictly from a level design perspective. There's a complicated environment art process that also needs to be done. For this special edition level, our lead environment artist, Megan Shaw, did everything. So even though this rundown might seem complicated, there's a whole other pile of work that needs to be done in parallel to all the level design work. For the main game, I built about half of the levels, and Jason Dredger did the other half. Jamie Chang helping out with the bits here and there. Jamie did the majority of the awesome final level of the main game, for instance. Okay, no further ado, the rest of the commentary will be a step-by-step walkthrough of our level design process. Oh boy, we're in the home stretch now, folks. First thing we do is answer, what is level about? We come up with the gameplay concept the level is going to emphasize. how it fits in the game's story, what enemies and hazards might the level have, etc. Also, we consider what the player's goals in the level will be, beyond just move left to right. With this say level, we knew it was going to be in the ruins world in terms of progress, so that defined the elements that we would be working with. Then I drew a rough paper sketch of the level, which I reviewed with the artists. I created a more detailed paper version, roughly defining all the encounter spaces that were reviewed again with the artists. After that, I fired up our level editor, which we called the Shanker, due to it originally being used to create levels for our previous game Shank, start to make the level for real. Now that we have a concept, I start laying down platforms, basically the plane where the player moves, not the background or foreground. For this special edition level, Megan provided me with a few template structures and spaces. Between those and some bits from previous levels, I roughed out the level's space. At this point, I'm just working with platforms, no enemies or hazards. Some levels were built by making smaller portions of each level more complete. I do find this approach sometimes a bit challenging though, as it's harder to judge the level's overall flow and pacing that way. It's something that I know I should try and find a better balance with in the future. After I did a first pass on the level's layout with just platform art, I do a quick sanity check with the environment artist to make sure I haven't created any weird or impossible otherwise gross spaces. Important to check in. Most things in life that you're working on, always good to have another set of eyes on something. Once the first pass of the platforms has been done, we need to lay down collision underneath all those platforms. Collision is how the game engine understands where the ground is, what the player can stand on, which platforms can we jump through from beneath, etc. Once this is done, it's possible to run from one end of the level to the other, and I do so just to make sure none of the spaces feel strange or unnatural to navigate. The next step is the longest and most complicated by a wide margin. It's time to build all the level's encounters. This means adding enemies, hazards, and objectives. This is a highly iterative process, and there isn't a ton of hard logic behind it. I wish I had some magic formula for how to make an interesting ninja encounter. It would make all the levels much easier to build. But all I really do is look at the composition of the space, which areas the enemies will control, and with the vision codes, and patrolling, looking at what navigation options the player has, where they can hide, etc. Then just iterate. Sometimes platforms will get changed and moved around during the process. Occasionally the physical space changes a lot. The ruined fortress building at the centre of the special edition level was originally about 1/3 of its final size. I ended up expanding it to its current sizes to emphasise the 3 different wings. Also, part of this is setting up the objectives, like having to arm all the 3 sets of traps and such. Finally, I add all the checkpoints into the level, which again is very iterative and informed by playing the level and playtesting it with others. If someone dies and they roll their eyes in frustration at how far back they were sent, it's time to add another checkpoint. Absolutely. During the encounter building phase, I usually just set up some basic cameras. Once the encounters are a bit more put together, I'll go through and add proper cameras. While it may seem simple, setting up good camera framing is actually tremendously important to making a ninja level feel playable. If the camera's frame is half full of some wall while the player can't see the enemies up ahead, it's not fun at all. You have several different types of cameras with customizable offsets, anchor points, zoom levels and such. This is also a very iterative process, trying out different framing and such until it feels like you can really see everything you need to. There are also optional level features that have to be added. That includes placing the scrolls and artifact points, hidden objectives, seeing the scoring tiers for the level, and actually working on the special edition level. I forgot the formula I used for the core levels and had to reverse engineering it. Whoops, probably should have written it down. Man, nothing game design, going back to an old game, having to remake something because it has been lost in a drawer somewhere years beforehand. That's some really fascinating, like, game preservation stuff. Find all sorts of things that people have just, like, lost in a cupboard somewhere. It's wild. Designing and implementing the level's seals, optional objectives. The work involved in any of these varies quite a bit from level to level. Some seals might take 5 minutes to implement, some might take 5 hours or even 5 days before it's bug-free and reliable. The level's major checkpoints, the ones that restore items and have those large raven markers, also need to be designated and set up. Finally, there's a handful of small visual and audio things that need to be set up. Each of the vent areas need to have texture covers added to them that get revealed when the player enters the vent. Each surface platform in the level also needs to be tagged with the right sound material so that footfalls make the appropriate sound. wood versus stone versus metal. Finally, each space in the game needs to be tagged with a reverb region so that tight, cramped spaces have a different sound reverberation profile than larger, more open spaces. Seems like a small detail, but it makes a big difference in making the spaces feel distinct and more real. Nice, those little details we love. And that's a very step-by-step process of how the levels are built. Again, that's leaving out a tremendous portion of the work done by the environment artists. It also understates how iterative the process is, how many different things we try, change, throw away and tweak before the level comes together. That's only possible because our programmers built us an amazing level editor and continued to add features to it to help us be more effective, without which all this would simply be impossible. Without question, building ninja levels is the most challenging thing I've done in my design career. Watching people play them is also the most rewarding. Thank you very much for reading this. Hopefully it was interesting. And thank you for supporting our games and letting us keep doing what we want to do without compromise. Make great games. Niels Anderson. And that's the end of it. Again, I'll be very excited to play the next game, which from what I googled last time from Cly Games is Rotwood, which I already have in early access and I've really enjoyed playing the bits I have done. It is a roguelite, of course. I do love a good roguelike. I think when it comes out as well, I will be very excited to give it a go. Let me just hang on. I am going to double check in my Steam library. Hang on, I might have just played demo at like a Steam Early Access first rather than got it. Definitely on my wish list. Yes, there it is. Still in Early Access. Play games. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to pick that up after this stream. Knowing that it's this one as well, I'm absolutely going to pick that up. And when it comes out of Early Access, it's another one to do on stream. With that then, folks. Thank you very much for watching. For those who've stuck around to go through that dev commentary with us, I hope, like me, you've learnt something going through. Or mayhaps my voice has just given you a smooth evening's rest. Potentially. If you enjoyed yourselves, hit that like button for me. Push these videos through the algorithm. Especially helps with the smaller indie stuff as well, as that doesn't tend to get the views some of the bigger releases do tend to get. Subscribe for more content here on the channel. We're on the weekdays at 9 AM UK time with World of Warcraft, 6 PM in an evening with other games. The next game we'll be starting is another indie one, and it's one that the design ideas really interested me. It's called Licefangr, the Time Shift Warrior. The idea was there's either a time rewinding ability or when you die where you get your previous attempt or run is going off and fighting and solving puzzles and doing stuff while your next run then goes along. And in the trailers they had it so maybe there was 5, 6, 7, way more of you out all fighting at the same time, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So I added it to my wish list. I waited for it to be on sale as I was busy at the time, and now I can finally get back to it and see what that one's like. Well, I love visiting nostalgic trips like this game. You know, this is one I'd already played. It's finding new indie stuff I really enjoy as well, even if it's not dead on its release. But, with all that said, I hope you'll join me for other stuff. You can find playlists to everything we've already covered right here on the channel to binge to your heart's content. Much love, take care,